I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Today, you're going to learn the answer to my latest Can You Troubleshoot question. Can You Troubleshoot is a series of videos I do where first I show you an actual troubleshooting problem that I ran into, maybe with some video or some describe the problem, and then you guys take your best guess as to what the answer is. And now I'm going to reveal the answer to Can You Troubleshoot number 6. Let's remind ourselves what the problem was in Can You Troubleshoot number 6. So I'm going to arm the quad. I don't have motor stop active. The motors should be spinning right now, and they're not. Okay, so fine. And in fact, when I raise and lower the throttle, nothing happens. But I know the quad is armed, and when I push the stick, the correct motors do spin, but the throttle doesn't move at all. And the answer is, I'm going to tell you in 1 second, but don't go as soon as I tell you the answer, because I also want to look at all the answers people gave that were not correct, and I think we can learn a lot about troubleshooting and about how the quadcopter works by talking about why those answers aren't correct, in addition to just telling you what the correct answer was. But the correct answer was turtle mode. If you guessed that the quadcopter was in turtle mode, that is the correct answer. Turtle mode, in case you're not, I have a whole video series about, I think it's just one video actually, about how to set up turtle mode. I'll put a link to it in the upper right hand corner of the screen. But basically, turtle mode is used to flip the quad over if you crash and it ends up upside down. And what turtle mode does is it temporarily reverses the motors. So they push the opposite direction because, of course, the quad is upside down. You want it to push up and flip over, right? And then the other thing, when it first was implemented in beta flight, that was pretty much all it did. So the quad is upside down, and you would arm the quad, and the motors would start to spin, and then you would throttle up or kind of bump the roll stick, and the quad would flip over. But the problem was that since all four motors were spinning as soon as you arm, and two of the motors are probably like in the dirt or in the grass, right? Because the quad is going to be kind of angled over a little bit if it's upside down. Well, you could get people with burned ESCs and damaged props from the motors that were in the ground trying to spin up. So the way turtle mode works today is, number one, when turtle mode is active, raising the throttle doesn't do anything. We don't want the quadcopter to this isn't 3D mode. We don't want it to fly upside down. We just want it to kind of flip itself over. And the other thing that happens is then when you bump the pitch or roll stick, just the two motors on the side that needs to flip over will spin up and kind of flip it over whichever direction you push the pitch or roll stick. So it's only kind of just like a brilliant flash of insight that will lead you to go, oh, yeah, turtle mode produces this exact manifestation of symptoms. Throttle doesn't work, and only the two motors spin. And if you were really paying attention in the video that I posted, the question video, you would have seen that when I pushed the pitch and roll stick, the wrong motors spun up. So I pushed the stick to the right, and the left-hand motors spun up. And I pushed the stick forward, and the front motors spun up, not the back motors. The exact opposite motors spun up from the direction I was pushing the stick, and you probably couldn't see this, but also they were spinning the wrong direction. That would be pretty hard for you to notice on the video. But the reason that is because the assumption is that the quad is upside down, and it needs to, anyway, that's why the opposite motor spun up. So turtle mode is the answer. Now, here are some other answers that people gave that we'll talk about why they weren't correct. Most of the incorrect answers hinged on either the ESCs not being calibrated or min check or something about the receiver endpoints being set incorrectly. So let's explore that. So here in the receiver tab, we can look at the stick low threshold, and you can see that it's set to 1050. Now, stick low threshold is exactly the same thing as min check. It's a little confusing to have two names for the same thing. Min check was what it's called in the command line internally. Stick low threshold is the user-friendly name. Stick low threshold is the same as min check. And you can see my min check here is set to 1050, which means that if my throttle is above 1050, like it is now, then the quadcopter will refuse to arm. And actually, I normally set it, this is a little tip for you, there's actually deadband in the throttle stick below, when the throttle is below that. The motors won't speed up at all. So, like if I arm the quad right now and you listen to the motors, if I raise the throttle just a little, see the motors didn't speed up at all because I'm still below min check. The motors are not speeding up at all. I'm moving the throttle stick up and down. You can see right here nothing's happening, and it's only when I actually get them above, there we go, now the PID loop is active once I get above min check. So I must have just forgotten to do this on this quad, but I usually set it down to like 1010. Just look at my throttle channel and see it's at 1,000. So I'll just give myself just a tiniest bit of deadband here at the bottom. We'll fix that while we're here. If the throttle stick was above min check, the quadcopter would never arm. But what about if min check was too high? What if we set min check to 2,000? It won't go above 1,200. Well, that's not possible. Good. That's a nice little safety check they've built in. I didn't actually know that. So min check won't go above 1,200. And what that means is that we would have this humongous deadband at the bottom of the throttle. But once the throttle got above 1,200, the motors would spin. See? And wait a minute, though. In my example, the motors weren't spinning at all, and that's controlled by motor stop. So I'm going to enable motor stop, and then we'll go to the receiver tab, or let's go to the modes tab. And what you'll notice is that when I arm, now I'm armed, but the motors are not spinning. And the motors, now we'll go to the receiver tab, the motors will not begin to spin until the throttle the throttle channel gets to the stick low threshold, which I have set arbitrarily high just to try to make a troubleshooting scenario. So see, as soon as I hit 1,200, the motors begin to spin. As soon as I go below 1,200, the motors stop. Now, so we've got this dead band down here where the motors are not spinning. And that's kind of similar to the troubleshooting situation that we were dealing with, right? In fact, what happens now if if I move the roll and pitch stick, though, with the throttle below the stick roll threshold, nothing happens. And that is not the situation that I had in my troubleshooting scenario. When we're below the stick low threshold, the motors just don't spin at all. Now, if you're trying to recreate this at home, you may have turned on motor stop, and your motors may still have started spinning the minute you armed. And the reason for that is that if you have air mode active, air mode overrides motor stop. The whole point of air mode is that when the throttle is all the way down, you maintain authority. And that if the motor stops spinning when the throttle is all the way down, then obviously you won't have any authority. So air mode being active overrides motor stop. Okay, so what we figured out from all of this is that min check could not cause the problem that we were seeing. Min check being too low would cause the quadcopter to not arm at all, and min check being too high would disable the throttle up to 1,200, but once the throttle got above 1,200, the quadcopter would fly normally. What about the ESCs being miscalibrated? Well, first of all, if you're using D-Shot, the ESCs can't be miscalibrated. D-Shot doesn't do calibration, so that's out of the question. But if you were doing multi-shot or one-shot, you could get a situation where the quadcopter, the flight controller was saying, hey, ESCs, let's idle at a throttle value of 1050 or 1070, and the ESCs were going, he's telling us not to spin. If they were miscalibrated, they could misread that. But again, we would expect that as you raise the throttle, eventually the motors would start spinning, or they wouldn't spin at all if the calibration was totally screwed up, but they wouldn't spin at all. They wouldn't suddenly start spinning when we move the pitch or roll stick. A miscalibration of the ESCs wouldn't cause them to only work with the pitch and roll stick and not with the throttle. Another answer that people threw out was issues with the channel order or the channel mixing. And if we take a look here in Betaflight, the channel mapping is controlled here, and it determines for your transmitter channels 1, 2, 3, and 4 what order they come in. So I've got here AETR is my channel mapping. That means that roll is channel 1, pitch is channel 2, yaw is channel 3, and throttle is channel 4. And depending on how your model is set up in your transmitter, you may come in with a different order. I'm trying to think if this could cause the situation that we have here. I think it's unlikely because the throttle stick will be all the way down when you try to arm. Now, if throttle is mismapped to any of the other channels, then they'll all be at 1500. And therefore, because the sticks are centered, right? Throttle is going to be the only stick that isn't centered when you try to arm. And since the throttle then, if the throttle was not mapped correctly, then the quadcopter would never arm because the throttle would be at 1500 and it would not be below min check. So I think it's unlikely And if the throttle was mapped correctly, then once you armed, the motors would speed up correctly. It's just that pitch, roll, and yaw might be off, but the throttle is either mapped correctly and the motors will speed up, or it's mapped incorrectly and the quad won't arm in the first place. So there you go then. The answer is to go to the Modes tab and look for the Flip Over After Crash mode, also colloquially known as Turtle mode. And sure enough, this is what happened to the person who I was actually helping with this problem. Somehow his stuff had gotten set up so that accidentally he was enabling Turtle mode when he armed his quad. That's the answer. If that's what you guessed, good for you. I got to tell you, this completely mystified me. Until really literally when I was falling asleep in bed and I went, oh, yeah, it's turtle mode causes that. It's just such a weird combination of what could disable the throttle and only make pitch and roll work. Well, actually, it turns out that's exactly what turtle mode did. And if you notice that the wrong motors sped up or down when I moved the pitch and roll stick, or maybe you even noticed that the motors were spinning the wrong direction, be more likely that you would notice that with the props on, since the quadcopter would blow air upwards instead of downwards and wouldn't take off. But we were testing with props off. If you notice those things, then that's the giveaway. Thank you guys so much for watching. My apologies that it took me a little while to get this answer out, but gave you more time to guess. But now you know the answer. Thank you guys for watching. As always, happy flying.